Okay, 18 mag. This is, I think, a relatively recent one. That I was lucky to find a copy on the used market. It's also one of the oddest of the 18xx's I've taken a look at. Let's peek at the components just because, but they're top-notch quality. Lonnie Games puts out good stuff. Really, really thick tiles. There are some that actually feel too thick. Maybe I'm just getting used to these. But yeah, I mean, you're not gonna tear a tile here. This case, I don't know how well this is gonna hold up once they're in the box. Rubber band or something might help. It doesn't really. I mean, I've got it closed, and it feels like it has some stickiness to it, in the sense that certainly it'd be fine laying flat, but on its side, I don't know. You know, it might spill open. But as a tool to divide up and sort your pieces, it seems very helpful. Unfortunately, this game has a lot of tiles, so they don't all fit in it. And well, there you have that. Real quality cards for all the trains and the shares. Again, we're getting used to this. You know, the stock for the company is all high quality. Better than the Avalon Hill quality that 1830 came out with, and about as good as you can get, really. Wooden tokens. Some games I have gripes about using wooden tokens, especially on the stock market. It doesn't do much harm here. Comes with some paper money, nothing too exciting about that. I've mentioned more of these rubber bands. Whoever packaged this used these wonderful rubber bands that I don't think ever decay. But I don't know how to get them. I'm sure I could figure it out if I needed to. 2 copies of the rules, I think in German and English. Yeah, this is German. Which always feels somewhat extravagant to me. I don't know how big the runs are. It may be that, you know, it doesn't really make much difference that in order to get a good deal, they had to print out, you know, a full amount of each. Player aid that contains all the track upgrades. This is really helpful enough that whoever owned it before me photocopied it a few times. This is the stock price board, which is in the solo game instead serves as the material to hold the bot information on. Likewise, we have the main board here with the earnings track and the information. You know, it's a large board, but then here's the 2-player board with all the information you need in the 2-player or solitaire game, and the privates, or I'm sorry, the corporations that are available for that and how they're operated is on there. You get the stock value and the game-specific share movement value, payments board, all that. It's a nice solution to give sorry, something is setting my nose off today down here. Maybe some mold or something that isn't normally smellable. Anyway, it's a nice solution to be able to shrink the board down, give you this extra option. One of the big problems with XX is it often doesn't play very well in small numbers, and to create a solo specific, well, a two-player specific game and then a solo bot for it is something that's really lacking in most of the XX world. Now, what about the rules and the systems that are in play here? Yeah, we do the easy part first. So, as I've alluded to, this game kind of upends a lot of your preconceptions about an 18xx game. The primary thing being, you're not running rail corporations. You're running minor companies that you have almost no control. The only control you really have over them is their operating phase. You're able to build track for them, you're able to pay for dots, you're able to buy trains, and you're able to spend money on the things that the major corporations have. The major corporations that you actually buy stock in are not rail companies. They're not going to run like rail companies. Largely, the only decisions they have is how much do I pay out, and do I buy one of these special blocking tokens that increases the value of a city, which is kind of an interesting concept. Because if you're the only person in that city, it may be very attractive to you to increase its value, and it certainly is attractive to lock other people out. But what this means is there's nowhere near the same level of interest in gaining control of a corporation. And there's also not really much concept of raping a corporation in order to, like, steal all its money and leave it its burning, smoldering hulk to some poor hapless person. So the pure engineering 18xx games, you don't tend to have a hell of a lot of that kind of activity going on, where somebody, burns a company to the ground and hands it off and starts a new one. And in a sense, this game is of that tradition, because the focus of your miner is almost exclusively on the engineering side of things, saving up for trains and stuff like that. But you don't have a lot of room for skullduggery. You're not going to float another corporation to save your current one. You're not going to be able to rape and dump. All you really can do is run your companies to the best of your ability. And there's a minor factor of trying to move money into the public corporations that really starts to kick into high gear in the last operating round or two, when all the trains have been settled. And it's always that way, okay? Because the way that the phase changes take place is set up so that the trains aren't out, and probably it's the 6 trains that are expensive and big and hard to get. The trains aren't all out until that last set of operating rounds. And so many of the corporations are going to be scrimping and saving and trying to get their cash together to buy that final train. Because that final train does tend to make you money. The nature of the way the track gets laid out, the capability to make fairly long-sized runs, means that it's usually worth buying the biggest train that you can, even though it means you have to throw away a lower valued train and you don't get its run. See, that's now a completely other thing. There's no rusting in this game. You have to get rid of your trains yourself, and it's certainly kinder and gentler than rusting. Rusting can leave you so that, hey, I got nothing to run at all, or oh boy, I wasn't ready for it there. Here you get to run your trains as long as you want to build up the cash reserve that you need to buy another train. And you have other options of things to pay for, mainly in those, there's tokens, but also mainly things that go into those public corporations. And those public corporations are taking money that you use normally, like you're used to using in an 18xx game. They get a portion of that money. So, for example, if you want to build over difficult terrain, that money goes into one public corporation. If you buy tokens, that money goes into one public corporation, as does money for building an extra yellow track line. There's the rail car ones, which are just bonuses that are the kind of bonuses that would normally be associated with a private company. Those have been moved into the public corporations to give more flavor and more different types to these. It does mean that there's very little in terms of operating the public corporations, and the minor corporations are also, or the minor companies are also kind of easier to operate, right? Think of miners in any game of 18xx. You lay your track, you perhaps buy a token or a train, and you pay out, and that's it. It's 50-50. There's not even an option to withhold earnings with the miners. And what that means is you have very, very little in terms of levers to manipulate your money over in them. You're getting the kind of payout that people dream of in an 1830 game, 50% in the stock pool, 50% in my holdings, payout every time, and but you're also not getting any stock value off them. The miners themselves are actually worthless, but they produce big money at the end stage of the game. And they're almost always going to have two trains. Right at the beginning, you have one train, you're given that for free. That's another thing. You can't screw up in this too badly. You can screw up. You could set up track that can't run. And that's actually not that unlikely. Let me flip through this, see if there's anything that I really wanted to cover that I haven't sort of bumbled over anyhow. Ah, yes, the starting packet. So, there's no auction in the game, which is both a blessing and a curse, right? An auction kind of requires that the players evaluate what each company is worth and make a number of really hard decisions right at the very, in the first action of the game. They have to make these decisions, and boy, is that sometimes just blind. Take a look at 1830 and the Camden and Amboy. Nobody on their first play is going to think that it's worth that much more than these other privates that do a lot more, right? It's just, but because of its high value and the fact that you can use it to dump it into a company, it becomes incredibly, incredibly valuable as a means of stealing the wealth of your corporations. Tobacco everywhere. Instead, what this has is sort of a sliding. I don't know what it should be called, but from priority player around, each person makes one selection, and then the second player makes the first selection, then the third and the fourth. Um, that may work okay for a smaller number of players, but having done it twice in 6 players, I can tell you that the 5th and 6th player get really kind of hosed by that. Serpentine is probably, I would suggest trying that at least once. I haven't done it yet, so I can't tell you how happy I would be with that. But, yeah, and by Serpentine I mean the first player goes, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, but then the 6th player picks 2 in a row, and then it goes back to the 5th and 4th, third. The reason for that is that the first player gets their choice of the best company, but the best standalone company, because they're not going to be able to guarantee any kind of synergy between 2 companies. The 6th player gets the best synergy out of the remaining companies. Now, the 2 player would get that normally. Well, no, they wouldn't, because they don't get a double pick. So that may be what's being attempted to be avoided, is giving someone a really good, hey, you get to pick 2 that have a good synergy between them. Because nobody ever really gets that, do they? Yeah, because the second player in this current style gets to pick second and then 7th, or whatever, n plus 1th, which means they're not picking 2 at the same time. Personally, I think that picking 2 at the same time is not that big an advantage, and the disadvantage of getting, the last and last minus 1th pick out of the first out of the minors is pretty damn big. And that's the thing, in 6 players you only get 2 minors, and then you get 2 shares of stock. The shares of stock don't mean a hell of a lot. They're just some cash, basically. Whoever gets the first pick out of the shares of stock, I'll probably take the one that'll be worth the most on that first turn. That may include the concept of payouts, but it also has to do with a randomized starting value for the corporations, because players aren't really doing anything. The corporations have to be there to collect money from the beginning of the game, and players don't really do anything to run those corporations. The only real choice they have is, how am I going to use that money? Am I going to buy one of them tokens, or am I going to pay it out, and how do I amortize paying it out? Yeah. Now, in smaller numbers of players, 4 or less, 3 or 4 basically, I would say, you have a greater proportion of minor companies. And I think that the way that those are dealt out, the way that those are selected is probably less painful than the 6-player game, where the way it worked was the worst possible, which is basically you get two minors. So the 1 player gets the first choice, and then they get the last choice of the minors, which is pretty bad. But the second player gets the second choice and the 7th choice, and that gives them pretty good choices in both cases, and it's big. The reason that they're getting the two minors, the reason that the minors are so important is, again, the stocks you can sell right away. You're not stuck with them. The minors are with you for the rest of the game. They are the railway companies you are going to be running. What's funky about the rail running? Scrapping your own trains. having to pay out half and half, being able to buy a yellow track. There's these, when I was talking about components, there's these little barrier counters. They're a step up from the 1830 barriers, which could get covered up on the board. These allow you to represent them. There's also one that splits a hex in half, which is kind of a weird thing. It just means the track can't cross between those two. But yeah, you're making this flat stock market with sales only moving things back one space. The game end is triggered by the purchase of the trains. There's an unlimited number of trains. But yeah, basically, when you buy the first, so the 2 trains are already in existence, and every company has one. When you buy the first 3, 4, or 6 train, you go into the green phase. Now, that could be someone buys a 6 train right off. That's unlikely. But it is possible that everyone kind of decides to hold off on the 2s, probably unwise, but... and then the second type of train that comes out forces you into the browns, and then the third type forces you into the grays and sets the timer on the end of game. There'll be one more stock round, and then there'll be 3 more operating rounds, and then that's it. I'm trying to think. So, yeah, the kind of thinking that operates in this game, the miners, look, there you're worried about your 2 companies, your 2 miners, or 3 or 4, depending on the number of players, but your 2 miners being able to work together and being able to access the important, valuable stuff, both of them. Building the track and whatnot, getting the right trains in place. How much people cooperate and how dicky they are has a major, major effect on the game. I had big runs fairly early the first time I played because people kind of laid the track that looked like it was supposed to go somewhere, and nobody got too hosed. One company got kind of sealed off by this. But most of the companies made pretty good starting money, moved up to the second 2 train or the 3 train fairly early, made decent money in the mid-game period, but the mid-game lasted a little while. The second time, the video that I played, the first part of the game was really slow out of the starting gate because people were really, really dicky. And I think that's the better way to play in general, but anyway, it made the mid-game, where the 4 train comes out, made that part of the game very, very fast. It basically just dropped all at once. Actually, the first one kind of did too. I'm trying to think. I don't know. The placement of an important dot in the game is exceedingly valuable, possibly worth delaying trains. We saw someone do pretty well after having, kind of hosed their trainage just by the locations of those dots for the end game part, where you're making huge runs. The runs are all fairly large. I don't know, for each phase of the game. There's solo rules. Well, there's 2-player and solo rules. Like I mentioned, I have no real opinion on them, haven't played them. It's hard for me to say how much I like this one, because it doesn't fit sort of the standard models that I have for 18xx. But like almost all the Londy games, it has, you know, innovative ideas in it or innovative combinations. This may be the most off the sort of standard XX track that I'm used to, just because you're not running corporations as rail corporations. The corporations that you're running, you have very little control over. Largely, the companies either are set up so that they have to use the corporation and pay for it, and really the investment decisions are based on how likely is this corporation, how likely are the miners going to be towards throwing money into this corporation or that one, which, the more money that's thrown in, the more that's available to give out dividends. Control of the presidency allows you to control the rate of the dividends. That probably is something that, unless you're going to dump the company's presidency, all players would kind of do the same thing with. But control of the presidency also allows you to control those blocking tokens that add 10 to the value of a space. And those become, they're kind of a double-edged sword, but you can really bonus one of your miners with that. And in fact, that's a reason you might not want synergy, is that if you've got two miner companies that are far apart on the map, you can utilize those bonus tokens in the spaces where you have your tokens kind of with impunity. But if you're working close together, you kind of have to make sure that you get your dots where you want them. and you don't want to be throwing those extra tokens into play. So again, interesting trade-offs there. But just the kind of thinking that's involved especially in dealing with the major corporations, is just very, very different. What's going to make them money? Well, a lot of that comes down to being used to the game in order to be able to predict, hey, how much is this going to make? You could probably reason it out, but I found the second time I was a lot better capable of figuring out which, especially of the railcar companies, were going to still be valuable later in the game. I had a little bit more trouble with the track building ones and token laying, because things didn't look like there were going to be a lot there, and then there became a desire to throw more in. Towards the very end of the game, you start shoveling money into the major corporations from your miners. The reason is the miners split 50-50. Once you have your trains set the way you want them, and you bought all your tokens and everything, there's nothing else to use your money for. And if you throw it into a major corporation by buying that corporation's services at the highest price you possibly can pay, you end up increasing its capacity to give out money. Now, for the most part, except for the big train companies, the major corporations are not going to give you out a big payout. Generally, the biggest payout should be about 21 a share, because that's the maximal amount that you need in order to move forward 4 spaces. But what we found was with the train company that was offering the 6 trains, and a lot of 6 trains falling at the end of the game, they were giving out 50 a share, which, is about equivalent to what the miners were splitting at. No, the miners were splitting it at half that. So normally the income you derive from your paper, your stocks, is more on the stock value. than on the on the income on the dividend. You know, I mean, if it's paying out 21 a share, it also happens to be going up more than 21 a share, just because it's pushing it four spaces. But that value isn't in your pocket. That value is in your paper, and you can lose it. If you have a presidency, you can't exchange it. So there's a lot of facets to that you have to consider. But that's just really kind of squeezing money out of your holdings rather than anything else. What I did find was the stock holdings tend to fill out fairly early in the game, in the mid game era or whatever, and then there's not a lot of big movement on them. Because it's pretty much a matter of, unless something becomes unlikely to produce much income anymore, players just hold on to the shares that they have. They can't afford to give up a share because the decision's been made, well, this isn't going to make a lot of money for the rest of the game. Anyway, I think it's an interesting and very, very different take on the XX rule set. And I'm glad I have it. There's very few XXs though that I'm like, oh, I'm so unhappy I have this. I like XX, but this one is just such a unique take on it that it's hard for me to judge. Is this just a really good XX, or where else does it fall in there? It's got nothing really in the mechanisms that I dislike. The one thing, well, the serpentine, the initial packet could be changed. One thing that I find kind of disturbing though is the miners. All their tokens look so similar that it's sometimes hard. You don't get the colored picture of what the track outlays are. I usually don't like games that are focused so heavily on engineering, which is perhaps why I'm hedging my bets here on this. A lot of the times, I prefer the games with lots and lots of stock manipulation and that kind of play. Lonnie doesn't tend to write those games. He tends to write ones with different engineering challenges in them. Here you've got these major corporations that give you options on the coal mines, that give you options on paying for plus trains that go through the doinks better, that become really important late in the game, that allow you to upgrade the red areas, and that really focus on building the track and getting the right train allotment to work with that track and getting your dots where they belong and all that kind of stuff. Usually those are not the kind of games I tend to like, but strangely enough, the Alani games that usually tend to do a better job of throwing enough curveballs in there that I'm like, well, this is complicated enough that it is more enjoyable than the straight engineering challenge that you can kind of look at and say, well, I know who's won now. There's a lot to shake this game up, and a lot of late money, which also helps. But there isn't that kind of shocking stock manipulation type moves that the 1830 type game really lives with. And what I played, I don't remember which one I played recently. I just played one. Was it 1860? I think it was 1860. In a very small number of players, and just it couldn't have been 60. No, it was not 1860. And now I am lost as to what it was. It was the 1889, the Japanese one. Yeah. And playing that in, so that map is good for a small number of players supposedly, but the amount of control that one person in a three or four player game can have is just so devastating to me that it's a matter of I can sit back and predict almost everything. There might be a fork where I have to predict down both paths, but I just always feel like I have such control over the game, whereas the larger number of players in those kind of chaotic financial situations, it really feels like you're competing with almost like a randomizer, because there's just too many different competing goals in them. But these these more engineering based games, you can't make a prediction on that kind of level. The prediction is more, well, how well will this person optimize, and how do you know that? I'm not necessarily very good at that. Anyway, enjoyable, definitely, maybe more than that. Cheers.